Hello, welcome to the Portland Film Fest. Thank you for supporting the Portland Film Fest and independent film from all around the world. Today we have very special guests. We have the cast and crew of the film Lune. It is one of the special films programmed in our mental health program, and it is one of 6 films in competition. It's quite a distinction because we have some great films here, and this one is very deserving of that distinction. So let's get started, but I would first like to thank our sponsors. We'd like to thank Comcast for its 4th consecutive year of tremendous support. Without Comcast's support, we would not be able to broadcast this fest, the Q&As, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you to Comcast, as well as the other sponsors, Corner Camera, Portland Mortgage, and Oregon Film. For more info on our sponsors and to buy tickets, please check out PDXFF21. But let's get started and let's start talking to our guests. I'll first introduce the co-directors, such a rarity in film today, co-directors Aviva and Arturo. Please introduce yourselves and correct my mispronunciations if I made them.
No, that's my name, Aviva. Hi, I'm the co-director.
And I'm Arturo, also nicely pronounced. And
okay, thanks.
Co-director.
And 2 of the cast members, we have Vlad and Chloe.
Pretty good on pronunciation.
Actually, my first pronunciation was Zimbabwean film. So we had several Zimbabwean and South African with various tribal names. Like I couldn't pronounce their names. Even they couldn't pronounce each other's names because there were all these tribal distinctions. So I'm like, just to cover my bases, I'm just gonna make sure. So where are you guys all dialing in from?
I'm dialing in from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour. And we are in Hamilton, Ontario, a small city close to Toronto.
Lovely.
And I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually leads me to my first question. I'd like to start all of these independent film discussions about funding, because so much of filmmaking, especially indie film, is how and where you get your funding. I know, unlike every other country in the world, we have very few, government-sponsored arts programs that provide funding. My experience in working with directors on projects, I'm a writer based in New York. I'm always lucky to have someone on board who's Canadian or English or Australian or French, because there is support for the arts and funding. And I know that Canada is too, so please tell us to what degree that helped in the production of Lune.
It helped 100% because the Canadian government funded our film for the most part. We got funding from the Canadian Council of the Arts and also the Toronto Arts Council.
Toronto Arts Council,
yeah.
Yes.
And then we had an executive director come on board and help us as well, of private funding. That's
fantastic. So you would say 90% was government funded?
Yeah.
And that's incredible. That's incredible.
It is.
That's really, American filmmakers, it's a nope, pretty much. But that's also great because, I think so much of funding, especially now, not so much independent film, but the sort of films that bridge that gap between mainstream and indie, a lot of funding comes from hedge funds, private equity funds. There's a lot of money coming from overseas. And with that, there's always a degree of censorship. Certain things you can't talk about, you can't approach a certain way. And I think there's one scene in particular in this film where it's like they didn't have any censorship, because when the scene in when she approaches the rabbi, like this is clearly a scene where, this would not pass muster with a lot of censors and a lot of funders. It just wouldn't.
True.
So, yeah, talk to me about, your commitment to independent film and how you, over through your careers, fought this sort of controlling or censorship-driven, efforts on your work, given from the mainstream film industry or other arts.
You want to go?
Sure. I'll talk a little bit about my background, which I am a documentary filmmaker originally for 15 years. And all of my films have been funded from government cultural institutions in Mexico and in Canada. So it's a lot of liberty to get funded, and there is, in my case, there hasn't been any censorship. So I come from a background that in documentary we choose very hard to talk subjects that sometimes are controversial, and it's very. I feel very privileged to have the funding without being censored.
That's fantastic. I see in your bio you had a Guggenheim. You were a Guggenheim fellow.
Yes, I am a Guggenheim fellow.
Yeah, you are. That's a great distinction. Kudos to you, and you're very privileged to be able to work like that. Yeah, it's really special. There's so much talk of that, in all the industries, and Aviva, talk to me about what it means to you to be a true independent filmmaker.
One of the stipulations when you get funding from the arts councils is that the project remains your own. So it can't be owned by anybody else. It has to be owned by you, the creator. So within that, you take that sense of ownership and therefore responsibility with you when you're creating. I think I'm an independent filmmaker by necessity because I'm the only one that will cast me in big parts like this. So I create my own work because I want to work, and that's it. Evolved that way. I think that if Netflix came to me and asked me to direct a project, I would say yes. And then I would probably be up against everything that you're talking about, censorship and restrictions. And but because I work in independent film and I come from a theater background, I haven't really had to negotiate with much of that because it's basically just me and Arturo calling the shots, if that makes sense.
That's great. So another really remarkable thing about this film that it is co-directed. It's rare to see co-directed features. I mean, there are a few couples who work solely, I think, as co-directors, but it's so rare. And just the nature of the beast, this is my film, my project, my shot, my way of doing things. I'm really curious about the collaborative process of you two balancing being a director, being co-directors. Was it, certain scenes, one of you was the director, one was more of an AD, or did you say, I'll, handle, this part of the film, you handle that? Like, how did you work out that collaborative process?
We are a couple in real life, so we're used to
Oh boy.
for a long time, for 12 years?
13 years.
13 years. And we have a kid together, a 9-year-old kid. So we are
That's a co-directing project right there, huh?
Collaborating. This is our second film that we direct together. The first one was The Door Boy in 2016. So before that, Aviva was mostly working in theater, and I was making documentaries, until one day we decided just out of the blue, like, let's unite our skills and make a film. And we chose a play to kind of combine the theater aspect with the film aspect. So it was a play and we brought it to film. As a documentary filmmaker, I like the immediacy of shooting handheld and making it look a bit like it's right there in the moment with very few cuts. And Aviva, from her background, she is very, she has a lot of, how would we say that, skill in dealing with actors from her theater background. So I think if I could define our relationship, is mostly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I direct the visual aspect of it and she directs the acting aspect of it, which sometimes is hard to separate.
Right. I mean, that's so key.
In this film, in Lune, whenever I was in front of the camera, Arturo was directing. I took off that directing hat.
That worked out in that case, because you are wearing so many hats in this film. You are the co-director, you are the lead, and you also were one of the co-writers.
That's right.
Yes.
So wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad. Let's talk about casting and performance. Vlad and Chloe, like, what was your casting process like? Do you have a monologue prepared, or how did you read sides from? How did you go about casting?
I auditioned over a tape first, like a self-tape, just submitted a self-tape. And then I went in for a read with Aviva. And as soon as I met her, I just wanted to hug her. Like, I've never done that ever in my life with a future potential director, but it just felt so, I don't know, natural. I just wanted to hug her, and we hugged, and it was nice. And then we just sat on her kitchen table and read it, and that was it. And then she called me 2 days later, and she's like, "You got the part." And I cried, and
That's great. That's a great story.
then we made.
And that's great. And what about you, Vlad?
It was a little bit of the same experience. I think I started the casting process a little bit early in the casting process, if I'm not wrong. I handed in a tape as well, and then I went on vacation. And on vacation, my agent was like, "Yeah, you have a call back. When you come back, you're gonna have to go to Toronto." And I was just like, all right, cool. and it was the same thing the minute that I met the team, because Arturo, Aviva, the producer, the other producer, and the one that was doing choreography, they were in the room. And I guess, like, you know, it was like a chemistry read, like we were testing with different actors, and I just fell in love with the team right away. I was just like, this feels so homey and so collaborative. And that's the thing, you know, like in an audition process, you know, as an actor, a lot of actors, they tend to go in a room wanting the project so much. It feels like desperate or needy. But I really decided to approach it in a way that is like a collaboration, and how am I going to serve the story well, and how is the team going to serve me as an artist, and how can we bounce off each other and work together? So, and I think we had a little snippet of that during the audition process, and one thing led to another, and yeah, I was part of Lune, and I cried as well. And I was
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, more and more, although not exactly intimacy coordinator, there's so much more talk these days of the process of working with actors and the intimacy of that process and getting into character and preparing. Did you, Vlad, and you, Chloe, did you study any particular method or any particular schools of acting?
I've done a lot of training, different trainings. You know, like I have a background in cinema, like that's what I studied in college, cinema production. And then I did a lot of mentorship programs with theater companies, with acting schools. And then I did the Canadian Film Center in Toronto, their Actors Conservatory. So like I kind of like grabbed a lot of different knowledge and sort of created my own bank of training. I wouldn't say I have a process. I guess for like each film, it's different.
Right.
And to be honest, I wouldn't be able to tell you how I approached this one. It was just like the text, the script spoke so much for itself that it was not, I wouldn't say easy, but it was more accessible to dive into the character and eat that script and embody it, and then just go on set and work with the other actors and the directors, and just find the pacing of who Mike is. But I wouldn't say it was like a specific approach to it.
That's fair enough. I mean, I think that, you know, you find your own process and you find your own way of getting into character and finding your performance. And speaking of performance, Chloe, I can see that you have a background in contemporary dance.
Yeah.
Was that part of the role, or how did that come about? Because I love contemporary dance.
Yeah, that was part of the role of Eliza, was that she's trying to get into a dance school. And that was like a huge pull for me as well for this character, and why like I fell in love with the idea of playing Eliza too, was to be able to share those parts of my dancing life on screen as well. And especially for Eliza, the heart of her feelings lie in her movement. There's not a lot of space for her to have big feelings at home. So dance is that place, that safe space for her. And for me growing up as well, like that was my safe space too. So to be able to just translate, those true things about who I am into playing her was, really cool.
Yeah. I think her final choreography in the film, it's so gratifying, and it pulls everything together. And it's a beautiful choreography, it's a beautiful dance, and it's very satisfying, and it's very visual. And I really love that. And I think that's the payoff of an indie film. I know that in a mainstream film, you could not close with like probably, I mean, what do I know, but like a 4-minute, contemporary choreography without dialogue. But it was a beautiful moment. So that really paid off. I just realized I forgot to give you guys a chance to shout out your socials. So let's do that now. Chloe, are you on the various socials?
Yeah, I have Instagram. Do I like say my handle out loud? Yeah.
Say your handle. Give us your handle.
At ChloVLS, CHLOVLS.
Okay. I don't know if they will include it in the blurb, but I always like to give those. And you, Vlad.
Yeah, I'm both on the Twitter and the Insta, and it's really simple. It's at Vlad_Alexis. Yeah.
Okay. And you, Aviva and Arturo?
We're at Lune the Film on Instagram.
Perfect. Well, I will certainly find you guys. I have to mention one thing. This is for you, Vlad.
Yes.
Because I think that it's so much of how a character presents is hair.
Yes.
Tell me about that flat top. I just got the flat top.
Yes. Okay. So, well, that's, again, like, kudos to Arturo and Aviva for giving us so much freedom in the creative process and collaborative process. And that is a conversation that I have with Aviva about Mike's Blackness and his identity overall. And hair is such a big part of it. And I was like, I feel like the homie has a high top, and she was like, yes, can you do that? I'm like, yeah, and I got to do my high top like every day, which was, I guess it was part of the process of like getting into Mike every day. It's just like blow dry my hair, pulling the spray, pulling like, the little fork and all that. And it really created a dimension of identity for me for this character, because we do speak about Blackness in the movie. And, Mike is in search of himself, and then we see his evolution throughout the movie. So it was really important for me to like tackle that. And it's still such a subject of conversation, Black hair on film. How do we approach it? How do we include the right people in the conversation, or the right hair person on set to do Black hair, which is, yes, it's different from other texture, but at the end of the day, it's hair, and everybody should know how to do hair, But all that to say that it was a beautiful process for me to like really, do it every time and really get into character by doing it.
I mean, it's a great visual. And also, technically, this is a period film. It's set in 94.
That's right.
I think that, so the flat top is really one of those period details.
Yeah.
And I think my favorite one, scene when they're at Mike's house and they're watching the X-Files, and you hear like the X-Files, the score of the X-Files like that. And I was like, okay. So that was a nice touch. But yeah, so, I would also like to talk about the writing of the film. I'm a writer, so I think it's too bad the writer, we have Aviva here. So it's always great to have writers in these Q&As because sometimes they're overlooked. I think what I most appreciated about this film and what stuck out to me about this, that was written according to the phases of the moon, these chapters. I think that was an interesting way to sort of frame the film. And so how much of that was a conscious way to not follow typical 3-act structure, and how much of it was like a more organic way to approach the story and to approach your character's sort of descent into this manic episode?
We played with the moon because the title of the film is Lune, and the word lunatic comes from the etymology of that word is from the moon and the phases of the moon. So it was definitely a conscious choice. Because I'm relatively new to screenwriting, it really helped me to impose a structure and to impose, I need an inciting incident here, I need a climax here. And the phases of the moon and the timeline did help that. And even thinking biologically, like, where is Miriam in her cycle of mania, of life, like of menstruation, like where in that 28 days, where is she? And the film actually only takes 2 weeks. So even kind of truncating half of a month, and it was conscious and it was helpful for me structurally.
Excellent. I think that's it's so organic to the film as you just explained, and it flows so nicely, these chapters,
Right.
As opposed to big big action, this incident, page 25, this big thing. It felt more organic, and it was a nice way to sort of bring the viewer into her descent and her spiral. So as I mentioned, this film is one of 6 in competition, and there are several sort of highlighted categories this year in the festival. One of them is mental health. As a screener, I screened several films, and a lot of them actually are about bipolar disorders. And why do you think that, and why did you choose this? I mean, there's all sorts of mental health issues, and I think it's so fantastic that we're talking about it and sort of exploring them, and especially the connection between creative people, because her character, she's an artist, she's a spoken word artist, she's a performance artist, she's an activist. I'm really curious about the ties between art and artists and mental health. How do you feel about that?
It's well documented that especially people with mania, I'm not sure about other conditions, but especially people with mania are highly, highly creative in a manic phase. My experience, like the film is a direct ripoff of my life with my dad, who, when he was manic, he would become very creative. He would write, he would do spoken word, he would enter synagogues and try to transform them into theaters. Like
Really? I see.
And then it was too much and too far. So the actual disease would prevent him from executing any of those artistic passions. Like they would explode. It would just be too much.
Right.
And that's what I find extremely painful about it, is that you have all this fodder and all this talent and all these brilliant ideas, but they are unable to be, at least with my experience with my dad, they were unable to be produced, if that makes sense.
Right. No, I mean, and I've spoken to people who have bipolar, and I've seen bipolar 1, which is obviously the more severe one. And there's this sense that I've heard people say, I don't want to take my meds, because at some point when they enter that manic phase, they're like, I wish I could bottle it. I feel so on, I feel so connected, I feel so creative. I could just do so much, but the thing is, you can't control that. So you can't stay at that spot, that sweet spot. You can't stay at that spot, and you just spiral out, and it just it's exhausting to people, and they just sort of sputter out. But it's really, it's really great that you're talking about mental health because it is, I think now more and more after obviously COVID and pandemic, when we're seeing the exacerbation of so many mental health issues, just because being locked in a room, well, I'm in New York, the studio. I was locked in a studio, you know, not a house, or for over 12 months, any mental health issues you have would be horribly exacerbated. You have no support network. And we've seen, you know, record number of overdoses, et cetera, et cetera. How much do you think a filmmaker or film in general can do to sort of address mental health? I mean, as well as staying creative and telling interesting stories.
Well, hopefully people can watch it, and anybody that has been touched by any kind of mental health condition can feel less alone and less isolated. And anybody that hasn't can feel a little bit more aware. It was really important that the character of Miriam was never a stereotype or a parody of somebody with bipolar. I think that often can happen in depictions, is you get this sort of caricature of crazy, and that's not really helpful for anyone.
Right.
I don't know if you know that Chloe is in fact a nurse in her other life, and she could probably speak to what she saw in the rise of mental health from a hospital point of view.
Please share that, Chloe. It'd be...
Yeah, it was quite astronomical and tragic. Yeah, we saw a huge uptick in exacerbation of like every mental health disorder you can think of. I worked in the Emerge for a better part of the pandemic, and it was really heartbreaking to see people who come in quite regularly anyway, to see them like completely on like off the tipping point of reality. And there was just no supports in place. There was no contingency plan for this either. And it was just so many people fell by the wayside. There was so many, like, I think we had like a 30% increase in suicides. Like it was beyond, there was just no access to help. It was just all the resources were being sucked into severe COVID cases. So a lot of mental health supports got completely shuttered, and it was hard. It was hard to watch.
Yeah,
there's going to be a lot of kind of residual effect as well. We're nowhere near out of it yet, but
I totally agree. Yeah, we're still like the aftershock. We're still in that, and that
for a while.
A lot of people, and you know, this reminds me of one of the more crucial scenes in the film. I think the climax when Miriam just completely hits her manic height, and she pushes Chloe and knocks her head against the wall, and she becomes violent, and you know, she's not manageable. And then the response, or the natural inclination, is to call the police. And we see, especially in the US, calling police during mental health breakdowns, it's really not a good idea. I'm not sure, is this the same in the Canadian healthcare system or police system, where if there's no designated mental health care workers in these crises, then police come and they wind up, you know what? So
there was no awareness or discussion of that in 1994.
Right.
Like, that's, if you were in trouble, you called the police. There was no, especially as a white person, there was no hesitation to do that. I think now there's much more awareness of like, this is not the best person to call.
Right.
And slowly there's other avenues, and there's more awareness of who you should call or how you can help. But back in the 90s, it was like, there was a scene that we cut from the film that was based on my real life, where I phoned Children's Aid, and they were like, we can't help you because your father's not a danger to himself, and he's not a danger to others physically. So even though I was in distress, they were like, sorry, kid. So there's really, I think there's more, because there's more awareness, there's slightly more help out there,
Right.
but I don't think it's anywhere near as
Mm.
healthy as it could be.
I see. And I mean, especially in a country like Canada, you know, we assume that you have a much stronger network of social support and services. So, I mean, it's a long way for us all to go, including Canada.
If you don't mind me adding to all of that, you know, like the movie, I feel like does such a great job at mapping what it was again in the early 1990. What were the like sort of like the steps of like someone's spiraling and how it affects their immediate family and the people around them, and how some people wouldn't even understand the language or wouldn't have the vocabulary to express what is happening with that person. And the movie only, you know, really shows it in one angle. And I'm sure like Mike as well, you know, is dealing with, you know, some mental health that is, you know, spawned from being a Black person in a colonized country. But, you know, I hope that this movie also opens people's eyes into like other people's story, especially, you know, especially Indigenous people that are dealing with mental health, and then the system not having the, you know, the tools to deal with that mental health, you know, and it's a big thing in Canada. You know, it's a really big problem that we don't have a system in place for people, especially Indigenous people. So I hope that like we're all aware of that, and that we're opening the conversation about that, and that this is just the start of something bigger than us.
Yeah, that's great to hear. There's a lot of news coming out of Canada about Indigenous movements and discoveries, like a school, Indigenous school, where graves were found of children, like a lot of things going on. So, you know, we need to pay a lot more attention to that. Here, Canada, you know, wherever there are Indigenous peoples. So thank you for mentioning that. That's a nice segue into the actual sort of inciting incident of the film, which is Miriam's decision upon the hearing of the release of Mandela to return to South Africa, I imagine, and to vote and to be part of this new government, this new process. That's one of the more inciting incidents I've ever seen in a film. Do you have a background in South Africa? Please tell us about that and how your personal connection to this notion of Mandela, this new government, and this new phase in history.
My dad was born and raised in South Africa, and he has had relatively dark skin. He was a Jewish man, but he was a little bit darker than me. And when he was 13, he was mistaken for a colored, and he was struck down to the ground. It's a poem in the film.
Right.
And that's based on my dad's life. And that for him was an awakening to racism. And so he spent the rest of his life fighting apartheid. And he moved to Canada in the early 70s. He lived all over the world, causing trouble wherever he went. And in the 90s, he did go back not after Mandela was released, but just before Mandela got voted in. And he ended up arrested and put in jail in the same prison that Mandela had been in.
Hi.
Yeah. And then South Africa kicked him out and sent him back to Canada. And so he was never allowed to return.
Did they revoke citizenship?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because he was a citizen of Canada. But they basically were like, don't come back. But he and I lived there from the time I was 5 till the time I was 9. So I do remember it. I remember being in a segregated school. I remember my dad and I would drive around the townships. So I remember being very, very little and seeing how other people lived, how Black people lived, and how different it was. And I, from that age, became an advocate and I guess for lack of a better word, I just became aware that not everybody had the same privilege that I did growing up as, a nice Jewish girl.
I see. I see that's a very deep and profound personal connection. I mean, overall, the film has more than a few progressive, activist, lefty bona fides. So it's just written throughout the entire thing. And so that brings me to the scene I mentioned before, when Miriam goes to the synagogue and challenges the rabbi. And I have so many questions about that scene. I have just writer questions, I have performance questions. I guess first was, how much of that, was ad-libbed? Was that improvised? How much of that was scripted?
It was all scripted. It was based on the reality that my dad had actually done that several times in his life. It was with his manic phases, there was a lot of repetition of the cause or the project or what have you. So this was one of the themes, is that he would try to convert the synagogue into a theater. I personally, thank goodness, never actually witnessed it, but I would always understand the aftermath. So some of the script was just pulled. The reason that my dad is credited as co-writer is because I blatantly stole his dialogue. Like, I had a suitcase of his writing, little bits of journal entries, or just stuff from memory. And I piecemealed it together and tried to inhabit the character of Miriam enough to make her own argument, because obviously being a woman in the Jewish faith is different than being a man in the Jewish faith. So tried to bring in some feminism. My dad was a feminist, but obviously his perspective would be different. And so yeah, we scripted it and tried to shoot it as written, but when the emotions are high, that always can kind of change.
Also, it's important to add, maybe 10 years ago, Brian, Aviva's dad, he went into a manic episode, and we decided to make a documentary about it. So we followed him for a week or something while he was manic. So we ended up with a bunch of footage, and we never finished the documentary. But we had a kind of like a small cut, like a 5-minute cut of several scenes while he was manic. So there are a few details in the script that were lifted from things that he said during the shooting of the documentary. So it was quite interesting to take real dialogue and incorporate it into the script.
That's incredible. I mean, that's incredible that you could have both of these media, the documentary and the feature, to sort of navigate your way through this issue, this moment in your father's life. And even more interesting that you credited him with a writing credit. A lot of people, write about other people and they take their dog and they don't credit them. So kudos to you for doing that. I'm also it's your father. This is your way of honoring him. I totally understand that. My second question about that scene is, so I guess this is where the co-directing really comes into play, because obviously, Arturo, you're directing her in that scene. I mean, I wonder, and also because you're also an actress in the theater and you wrote this, like, I just wonder how that all came together, because there's just so much going on in that scene that you're, acting in a scene that you wrote, and then you're working with someone else to direct. Were there any snafus in that process for that scene?
It depends if you're asking the writer me, the actor me, the director me, because the actor me watches that scene and criticizes my acting. The writer me criticizes the writing. And then the director me just blames Arturo. I'm kidding.
But I'm sure there's several takes of that scene.
Yes, there were several takes of that scene. It was a hard one to shoot, right, because of the movement of it and also the logistics. Like, we couldn't really rip out a Torah from we didn't have the budget to make 800 fake Torahs to rip apart. So we had to find a way to not implicate, but suggest that there was danger there or there was violence about to happen. Like we had to find a way to do that without actually doing it.
Mhm.
Also, it's a huge synagogue outside of Toronto, and they have rented it to Netflix, I think, for bigger productions.
Yeah, Grand Army, which is a great show. They use that synagogue.
They use that synagogue. Anyway, beautiful, huge synagogue. And when they rented it to us, they said yes. They asked for a script, but I don't think they read it because there's a lot of controversial stuff out there, and which most likely wouldn't agree. So they sent a guy, the day we arrived, they sent a guy, kind of like an observer, and he sat there. And I was really worried that he was going to stay the whole thing. I'm like, please leave, please leave. And thank goodness he left during the shoot. So we were like, oh, phew.
Oh my God, right? That would be just another level of tension and just like,
So
Yes.
2 people didn't do their jobs.
Wow.
Read it and then stay.
right? Well, thank God, right? That's a great story. So I think we are at time. I'd love to keep chatting with you. I would love to, but we have to wrap up here. So I'm going to just go around and ask you to tell me what your next projects are. And if you want to, again, shout out your social media handles. And we'll wrap up that way. So I'll start with you, Chloe.
Hey, I'm currently on location in Halifax, shooting a new series for Epics called From, about a small town in middle America where once you enter, you can't leave. And I play the town doctor. So
Oh.
yeah, and my social media handle is @ChloeVLS.
All right, thank you so much, Chloe. Vlad, your turn.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that show. By the way, Chloe, I'm like, so excited. What's up? I'm Vlad Alexis. I'm currently doing a lot of things at the same time, like directing, writing. I'm actually writing for a TV show right now. I'm one of 3 writers, and I'm really excited for that. Like I literally have a meeting in 15 minutes. But I also got cast as a lead in a movie that I can't talk about because like they haven't announced it yet, but it's a really, really exciting project with one of the up and coming female directors of Quebec. So it's all in French. And yeah, we're starting pre-production and rehearsals like in November and starting shooting in February. And then I have a bunch of like little side projects, you know.
You are all over the place.
I'm all over the place. I'm a Virgo, so obviously.
Okay, is that a Virgo thing? Okay.
It's a Virgo thing. It's a Virgo thing. Yeah. Oh, and my social media is @Vlad_Alexis on Instagram and Twitter.
Fantastic. Thanks, Vlad. And Aviva and Arturo, please. Your next project.
I'm directing a short in a couple of weeks with my theater company, Arc Stage. And Arturo and I are cooking up something to do soon, but we don't know what that is yet. TBD.
All right, well, I'll be looking out for it.
And I want to be part of it.
Yeah, it would be great to see you guys reunited, maybe the next in a trilogy. We'll see. Thank you so much for joining us in this Q&A, explaining your process, telling us about this incredible film. This, again, is one of 6 features in competition. We ask our viewers to vote. I'm sure you'll vote for this because you love this film as much as I did. We also ask after you vote to return to PDXFF, the virtual lobby where you can chat with other film festival goers, other filmmakers. You can buy more tickets to other films, buy merch, just hang out and just talk independent film with an indie film community. My name is Gesha-Marie Bland. Again, thanks to our sponsors. And my handle on social media is GMGeiko, GMGIKO, on Twitter and the gram. And I'd love to speak to you all about film. So once again, thanks so much, and signing off. Take care.
Thank you, Marie.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Take care.